You heard Chuck Foreman today, Alan Page today, Mark Lazarus today. We had a lot of good spots on. We're on here, of course, until 6 o'clock local, 7 o'clock in New York, and we continue with your phone calls. 888-MAD-DOG-6 is your two-way sports talk telephone number. We'll get that in the mix here, and we'll get you in the mix here momentarily. I did a little Olympic talk today, a lot of old Vikings today. Learned about the Vikings a little bit. The Miami game is the one game they didn't think they were going to win. Out of all the four that they played, that is the game that they didn't think. Again, as we discussed, they didn't score in these games, but the Miami game against that defense and that Miami team in 73 almost is a little like the Yankee team in 99. Now, follow me here on this second. The Yankee team in 98 wins 125 games all told. They bury everybody. They have the unbelievable regular season. They lose. They beat 3 rounds of the postseason. They bury the Padres in the World Series, and it's one of the great teams in history. The Dolphin team that year, when they went undefeated, only team ever to do it in the history of the NFL. Albeit a lot of games were close. Albeit, from a spread standpoint, they weren't overpowering. But that Miami team with a backup quarterback, because Earl Morrall played most of the year, Greasy broke his ankle and didn't come back into Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game. That was the week after the Immaculate Reception. Miami was an undefeated team. And so Miami goes down historically. So Miami and the Yankees, 98 and 72. And then the following year, Miami wins this. They lose 2 games. They bury everybody in the postseason. I can look up the scores, but they beat people badly in the postseason. And then they bury Minnesota. They win 24. Remember, against the Redskins, the game was 14-7. And although the game was, touchdown-wise, relatively close, remember, one of the touchdowns that the Redskins got was fluky with the Mike Bass play. So they win the game 14-7 against Washington. The Minnesota game that Chuck was referring to, they buried the Vikings. I can look it up. I think they ran for 220 yards of offense in that game. And they won 24-3. So, and that was like the 99 Yankees. The 99 Yankees, following 98, the team is forgotten. They buried everybody. They killed the Braves. They were a very efficient and back-to-back, like Miami was, very efficient, but it's a team that you forget the greatness of. And the next year's Dolphins, in a lot of ways, is very similar. And what hurt Minnesota, folks, you have to remember the dominant team in the AFC in the 70s. I know this is 40 years ago, and, who cares? But the dominant teams in the 70s, these are Hall of Fame teams. Miami, back-to-back, undefeated, 3 Super Bowls in a row. That's a big-time team. Pittsburgh, 4 Super Bowls, all those Hall of Famers. That's a big-time team. And then just for kicks, you throw in Oakland. Think about it for a minute. The only team that was able to break through there was Dallas. Dallas won. If look in the decade of the 70s, Dallas won 2, Miami won 2, Pittsburgh won 4, although I know one of them was 81. So, all right, we'll count 3. Pittsburgh won 3, and the Raiders won a Super Bowl. So Dallas beat Denver, and Dallas beat the Dolphins. They killed them both. Miami won the 2. That's 4 Super Bowls. Pittsburgh won. They did a tremendous job. They won the 3 Super Bowls. And Oakland won the 1 Super Bowl. They won in 70. The Raiders won the 75 season. Do I missing any? Let me think for a minute. Let me break this down again. We got 10 Super Bowl wins. The seasons. So the 71, the Colts won. They beat Dallas. It was freaky. 72, Dallas beats the 72 season. Dallas beats Miami. 72 Super Bowl. Colts won January of 71 to 70 season. Dallas won the 71 season. Miami won the 72 season. So from 72 through basically 79, the AFC won all the games. 2 for Miami, 3 for Pittsburgh, and 1 for the Raiders. The only one that broke through was Dallas, who beat Denver. So this is the team that Minnesota is up against. They're up against these dominant teams. The Raiders were a dominant team. They only won the one Super Bowl, but that is a dominant Oakland team. That team, has got a bunch of Hall of Famers all over the place. They got 2 linemen who are Hall of Famers in Shell and Upshaw. They got the coach who's a Hall of Famer in Madden. The quarterback is a Hall of Famer. Politnikov is a Hall of Famer. I mean, that is Hendricks is a Hall of Famer. They got Willie Brown is a Hall of Famer. They got Hall of Famers littered across that field. The Miami team, they don't have a lot of guys on defense, which always bothers them because just it's Bonacani. But, they got Greasy, Larry Little, Larry Zonka, Warfield. I mean, that's 4 Hall of Famers. Jim Ringo, that's 5 Hall of Famers on that offense in the early 70s. Little was a great guard. And then you throw in the Steeler team that's got Hall of Famers littered all. They got the most Hall of Famers of any franchise in the sport from that era. Green Bay has a ton too, but Pittsburgh's got Hall of Famers, whether it's Ham, Blunt, Lambert, Mean Joe Green, that's 4. Bradshaw 5. The 2 receivers are 7. Franco Harris is 8. Mike Webster is 9. I might be missing one. That's 9 Hall of Famers. And then here's Minnesota trying to knock their heads against those 3 teams. Asking a lot. So if you look at Minnesota in the 70s, they were not as good as these teams. Quite frankly. They weren't as good. How many Hall of Famers did Minnesota have on offense in the 70s? They had Tarkington. No other Hall of Chuck's not a Hall of Famer. Mick Tingelhoff might be a Hall of Famer, the center. Undersized. That's it. I don't think there's any other Hall of Famers on that team. I'd have to look at it, but I don't believe so. They got Hall of Famers on defense because obviously Alan Page is a Hall of Famer. I think Marshall is. I'd have to look at that defensive line. There's a couple of Hall of Famers on their defense, but there's not a ton of Hall of Famers on an offense. Not a lot of Hall of Famers, period, on that Viking team. They're beating their head against the wall against those teams in the AFC. People don't realize that. The Vikings get killed for losing all the games, but the AFC teams are historic. Those are historic. Pittsburgh's one of the great teams in the history of football. Miami was a great football team. I mean, I can make fun of Miami with the unbeaten season all I want, but that's a great football season team. And Oakland every year was either they were the best team or the second best team. Oakland either lost to Miami or Pittsburgh in the championship game, and the one year they won it. When Oakland got to the Super Bowl, they won. It was to get to the Super Bowl, it was a problem for Oakland. And here's poor Minnesota. You got to keep that in mind when you're evaluating those teams, and you're evaluating the Vikings. Now, again, the Chief team in '69, that team, I think what hurt Minnesota. Now, I'd have to go. I remember the game, but I can't remember play-by-play of that game. That was the game. I think it was outdoors in New Orleans. I may have been in Houston. One of the others. It was a cold day. It was at Tulane Stadium, so I believe it was in New Orleans. And again, that Chief team, they had been at Super Bowl I, so that Chief team had Dawson, had Otis Taylor, Elmo Wright, Hollop. They had a lot of good defensive players. Bobby Bell, Hall of Famer. Buck Buchanan, Hall of Famer. Emmett Thomas, Hall of Famer. Willie Lanier, Hall of Famer. Curly Culp, Hall of Famer. They had a ton of Hall of Famers, that team. And they had the experience because they had been there the year before. Or the 2 years before. Remember, Chiefs in Super Bowl I, Raiders in Super Bowl II, Jets in Super Bowl III, Chiefs in Super Bowl IV. So in a 4-year period, you had Chiefs, Jets, and Raiders. I mean, think about it. I mean, that's the old day. And the Chiefs were in that same division as Oakland. I mean, I'd say they were killing each other on a year-in, year-out basis. And as Madden has always told us, what always bothered him about the year the Chiefs won it is that Oakland played them 4 times that year. They won the division. Chiefs finished second. This is in '69. Chiefs finished second. They beat him in preseason. They beat him twice in the regular season. Oakland played Houston first round. They killed the Oilers, 42-0. They destroyed them. Maybe even worse, 50-0. And the Chiefs had to go play the Jets, who had won the year before. Chiefs beat Joe Willie at Shea. Namath has a terrible game. Look at it. He's like 12 for 40. I mean, interceptions, 90 yards. An atrocious game. And then the Chiefs went to Oakland and beat them 17-7. So the Raiders that year, and in those days, preseason was more important than it is now. And the Raiders had to beat them 4 times that year. That type of football, those early Super... Once Green Bay got out of there, which was sort of the extension of the old NFL, once Green Bay left after Super Bowl II, those AFC teams were big-time teams. And their Vikings ran into them year after year after year. 9 in front of the hour, we continue. Mad Dog Unleashed.